You didn't miss anything yet. It's okay. Okay, fine. I want to let you know that the PowerPoint and the handout are both actually live right now, so you could look that up if you want to see it. The other thing is that the recording is going to go live this evening, too, after the class. So this class is the result of a lot of personal experience on the part of Tuvia Berzow, who is the mashgiach down at the Tillamook cheese factory. It's a result of a lot of research on my part. As well. One of the things that I found a constant in all of the articles that I read is that rabbis have a very strong urge to make really corny jokes about cheese. For example, some of the articles that I read were entitled, "Eating Her Curds, No Way!" That was the first one. Then, "Weighing the Kosher Possibilities." "Wayward Way." "Say Cheese." "Way to Go, How Cheese is Made," and "Hard Facts About Hard Cheese." But I held it together, and I didn't make a really corny joke out of my class, although I kind of wanted to, but I kept it to a normal title. Why does cheese need to be kosher? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through this PowerPoint and look at a couple of items that we need to identify just so we know a little bit more about the cheese process. Yes, please hit the lights. Thank you, Rabbi.
Kill the lights?
Kill the lights, hit the lights.
Where's the switch?
There we go. Hold on. Here we go. I'm going to get ready myself with my headlamp. Okay, headlamp level 3. And good. Okay, good to go. I'm very prepared. I've got my lamp and my laser. All right. Keep going. Next slide. This one's pretty epic. Okay, this is just the intro. So we're going to be talking pretty much about the entire cheese, kosher cheese production process. We're going to do an in-depth look. What happened? Like THX?
We have Dolby sound.
Everybody remembers that,
Dolby
right?
sound.
Good, fine. Okay. Fine. An in-depth look at the laws of kashrus as they pertain to cheese. Next slide.
That's kind of cheesy.
Okay. So we're going to begin by defining a few different terms that we really need to know and a few different items that we know to be able to understand this class. Next slide. First one is a starter culture. And there you have it. The starter culture, like its name implies, is the first ingredient that's added to milk to make cheese. It's dumped into a gigantic cook vat. Tuvia is going to show you pictures of that cook vat when we get there. It contains specific bacteria that form acids in the milk. It lowers the pH of the milk, and the lactose in the milk turns to lactic acid when it is dumped in. The starter culture, just like any other ingredient that's going into cheese, needs to... Whoa, everything good? Needs to have a hefsher. It needs to be kosher. Just like anything that goes into cheese, our specific one has an OU, though you can't tell from this picture here, but it does have an OU. And a couple other things to know about it. The starter culture gives different cheeses their special characteristics, and there are certain agencies that require the mashgiach to put the starter culture in. We're going to talk about that at length when we get there. Next slide.
I have a question about the milk. Does the milk have to be boiled or anything first?
Usually the milk that we're going to start making cheese from has been pasteurized before they start the cheese-making process.
But you could do it with raw milk.
Technically, yes, it would work. But usually in a factory, they're dealing with sterility, and they pasteurize first. So the ingredient that we're going to talk about the most tonight, and that pretty much our entire discussion is going to center on, is rennet. So we have to define what rennet is. There's really two types of rennet. There is animal-based rennet, and there is microbial rennet. So animal-based rennet is a complex of enzymes produced in the abomasum of a calf. That is an abomasum. So as you know, calves and cows have several stomachs. The fourth stomach is called the abomasum, and in the abomasum, particularly of a calf, of a young calf, there are enzymes that when added to milk will cause the milk to curdle and coagulate. So those enzymes are called rennet. So they're the main ingredient that's going to be used in a factory to start curdling and coagulating the milk. In earlier generations, like in the times of the Gemara, when they would make cheese, they would take either a piece of an abomasum or the scummy contents of an abomasum, and they would put it into milk, and that would cause the milk to start to coagulate. Nowadays, when we do use animal rennet, which is not going to be as prevalent as microbial rennet, but when it is used nowadays, they extract the enzyme from the glands of the abomasum rather than actually putting in a piece of abomasum. Next slide. This is about the second type of rennet. The second type of rennet is microbial rennet. It's much more widely used nowadays in both kosher and non-kosher cheese production. It's made by growing the protein on microorganisms. and it's readily available with the kosher agency and kosher certification, and it has the same coagulating effects as regular animal rennet would. And there are many more cheese factories that use that today. However, animal rennet is still used in more artisan fancy cheeses, and it is widely used in Europe as opposed to the United States of America in cheese making. Another ingredient I want to mention that's at the bottom here is lipase, and if I'm going too fast through the slides, I want to let you know that it's all available online. I just want to make sure that you get the main information that you need from this to be able to follow the class. So lipase is another enzyme that's added to cheese. It's also almost always animal-derived, so it's going to be a very sensitive ingredient. It's used in Romano cheese and a lot of times in blue cheeses. Let's keep going. Next slide. Okay. And you have on this one a spoiler alert, because this is kind of a precursor to all the things we're going to talk about now. So there's going to be a lot of questions that pop into your head from this slide, but know that they will be dealt with. But there's a lot that's going to come of it. So rennet, like any other ingredient that goes into cheese, has to be kosher. Cheese with rennet from a calf that was not properly slaughtered, of course, would not be kosher because you'd be adding a non-kosher ingredient. However, if you had animal rennet or animal lipase that came from a calf that was shechted and deveined and salted correctly in accordance with halacha, and you took that rennet and you used it to make cheese, that cheese would be kosher. Basar b'challah, meat and milk. Yes, we'll get there. I know. It's scary. We'll get there. A really quick introduction to it is that there is no halachic problem with using animal-derived enzymes in cheese, mixing meat and milk, since the amounts used are minuscule. We'll talk about bittul, about nullification when we get there. Moreover, the enzymes are not cooked with the milk, so there's no transference of taste based on cooking, and they are flavorless. They don't have a taste anyways. But we'll explain that all in depth when we get to the basar b'challah question, which is... Still, of course, even cheese made with glatt kosher animal rennet and lipase is forbidden if it's manufactured by non-Jews. That's the other big spoiler, which we will. That'll be our main discussion tonight of how to make kosher cheese. Next slide. I didn't even have to tell you. Curds. So curds, after we have the rennet put into the milk, it's going to cause the milk to separate into two different entities, curds and whey. The coagulated milk turns into a smooth custard-like solid called the curd, and then the curd needs to be cut, which means it's broken up and separated from a rich cloudy liquid, and that liquid is called whey. So these are curds down here after they're separated from the whey. If we go to the next slide, we have curds still in the whey. So over here you see the liquidy whey with the curds inside. I'm going to talk about whey a little bit right now. However, we're not going to deal so much with whey in the halachic portion of this discussion, just because after looking through it, I realized that it really warranted its own entire class, which we're not going to be able to do tonight. But whey is the basic byproduct of cheese manufacturing. After the casein and the fat the casein is the protein within the milk, and the fat are really removed when you remove the curd. And what's left behind is not always white, because they add color when they're making cheese. And it's usually much thinner than milk, and it's called whey. Now, it still is it's rich in protein and lactose and minerals, so it has a lot of uses, which really they only started exploring about 25 years ago, though the Gemara knew about it many centuries ago, because it discusses the uses for nisubei decholav, which is whey.
What do they do with whey?
Woo! We're getting there. Next slide.
Okay.
Okay.
He's a plant in the audience.
Right. No, he's planted in there. It was all planted. Right. So as far as whey, what is it used for? So whey is often used in creating ricotta cheese. That's the first thing that it's used. They make that by cooking the liquid whey at high temperatures and adding an acid, usually acetic acid or vinegar, to create it. Whey is also used to create whey cream and whey cream butter. They separate the sweet whey from the whey cream, and they make a product called whey cream butter. But the most prevalent use for it is actually powdered whey. You find a lot of sports drinks, a lot of protein drinks that are using powdered whey, and there's a lot of applications in industrial settings where they use powdered whey in products to add that milky flavor.
No way.
Were you here for my intro? Yeah, you were here.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Show us the way.
Woo! Okay. Casein and caseinate. So I mentioned casein briefly. Casein is the main protein that's found in milk. It's also, you'll find on the back of a lot of food packages, it'll say one of the ingredients is casein. So that's the protein within cheese curds. So, and the laws that apply to gvina, to cheese, are going to apply in the most part to casein as well. So it is cheese that are used as an ingredient in industrial applications. There's several applications that I put up here. It's used as an emulsifier in coffee whiteners, stabler in ice cream, or thickener in soups, gravies, or whipped topping. If you have acid-based casein, they can combine that with a few things. They can combine it with sodium, and you'll get sodium caseinate. They can combine it with calcium, and you can get calcium caseinate, which is an ingredient in cereals such as Special K.
It's why your non-dairy creamer is always certified dairy.
Right, yeah. Let's move on to the next slide. This is a very important slide because this is going to have gigantic ramifications on a halachic level. Rennet-based cheese versus acid-based cheese. So there's two types of cheeses. Well, there's many types. But when it comes to causing the coagulation, there's really two types. There are rennet-based ones, and I'm talking both animal rennet or microbial rennet. So there's rennet-based cheeses. They have more solid curds, and the curds are easier to separate out of the liquid because they're more solid. And then there's acid-based cheeses, which is made by adding acidic bacterial cultures to the cheese to cause it to coagulate. Those make a more liquidy curd, a thinner curd. It's not as hard. That's what you're going to find in cottage cheese, for example, cream cheese. I listed a few prevalent ones. So these are rennet-based. It's cheddar, mozzarella, provolone, and hundreds of others. Acid-based would include cream cheese, cottage cheese, farmer's cheese. So whenever you're dealing with an acid-based cheese, you're dealing with a little bit of a thinner, more liquidy cheese because the acid doesn't have as strong an ability to coagulate as rennet, and it doesn't do the exact same thing as rennet. And it not doing the exact same thing as rennet is going to have big halachic ramifications. Review! Just to review really quickly, starter culture is the first ingredient added to pasteurized milk to make cheese. It's made of specific bacteria that form acids in the milk, lowering the pH to a critical acidity level. Rennet is the main ingredient to coagulate milk into curds, which eventually form cheese. It can be animal-based or microbial. Curds, or the coagulated milk, is formed into a smooth custard-like solid called a curd. Whey is the basic byproduct of cheese manufacturing, the portion of the milk that did not precipitate out of the milk and form cheese curds. Casein is the main protein found in milk and subsequently found in cheese curds. Defines cheeses that are used as ingredients in industrial applications. Rennet-based cheeses are cheeses whose main coagulant is rennet. It's often referred to as hard cheese, and it forms more solid curds than acid-set cheese. An acid-based cheese is cheese whose main coagulants are acids added to the milk. It's often referred to as soft cheese, as it forms softer curds than rennet-set cheese. Next one, and these are our first set of sources. At this point, we will turn on the lights. And I will take off this goofy lamp. There we go. And everybody can pick up their handout. No test. And I'm going to zip through this pretty fast, too. Okay, so we are going to be talking about, I'm going to move over here. We're going to be talking about a prohibition that the Mishnah and then the Gemara define as Gevinas Akum. Gevinas Akum is cheese manufactured by non-Jews. So the original source for Gevinas Akum is a Mishnah and Tractate of Avodah Zarah on 29b. The Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Sha'al Rabbi Yishmael es Rabbi Yoshua kashayam halchem baderech. Rabbi Yishmael asked Rabbi Yoshua the following question while they were walking on the way. So they were having a conversation as they were walking, and he asked them, for what reason did Chazal, our sages, forbid the cheese of non-Jews? Amar lo, he answered him, because they curdle it with the rennet of a nevela, an animal that was slaughtered properly. That's the translation we have up here from the Sansino Gemara. So the reason that it was forbidden, at least according to the Mishnah, was that the main way to make cheese was to take rennet and to put it into milk and cause that milk to coagulate. And the main way to do that was to take either the abomesum or the contents of an abomesum from a calf, and the non-Jewish people weren't shechting their animals, so whatever rennet they were going to be using was going to be a big non-kosher ingredient. So since that non-kosher ingredient was going to be the main thing curdling your milk and causing your cheese to form, that would make that non-kosher. So the Talmud, later on 35a through 38b, says that the sages of the Mishnaic period forbade eating cheese manufactured by non-Jews for several reasons. It actually lists 7. Most prominent commentaries, like the Rif, Rambam, and Shulchan Aruch, are all halachic commentaries, follow the rationale that Shmuel said, which was almost the exact same thing that Rabbi Yeshua said in the Mishnah, that it's due to the use of non-kosher animal rennet by non-Jews in their cheese production. So based on that, you wouldn't be able to acquire cheese from a non-Jewish cheese source, because that was the main way to create cheese in those times, because they would use the lining of the calf stomach. So Chazal forbade it because of the likelihood that whatever cheese you would get from them would contain rennet from calves, and that rennet wouldn't be kosher, and it would make the cheese non-kosher. So in addition to the reason that Shmuel gave in the Gemara, there are 6 other reasons. A lot of them were defeated in the Gemara. They were dismissed. But there are some that still made it through, and the Tur, who is really the precursor to the Shulchan Aruch, laid out a few others in addition to Shmuel. So the first one he brings is Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina said that you might have, when you're getting cheese from a non-Jewish source, you might have some milk from a non-kosher animal that's mixed into your cheese as well. And the Gemara and Rashi deal at length with the fact that if you take milk from a non-kosher animal, it doesn't curdle, doesn't coagulate well. But even so, they might have put a little bit in there if they were running short on milk, and although it doesn't coagulate as well, it would mix in and still be in the cheese. I also mentioned here that a lot of non-kosher species don't allow themselves to be milked, but you could get from camels, donkeys, or mares. So since they could get from any of those animals, and it could be that some would be mixed in even though it doesn't curdle well, you have that worry as well when you're buying cheese from a non-Jewish source. And then the other reason that made it into the Torah was Rav Ada bar Ava. I'm at the last line of the first page. That the surface of cheese might also be coated with lard. One of the last things that they would do before they would send it out to be sold is they would want it to look good. They would want it to be presentable. So they'd smear it with something to make it look all shiny and nice. And that could have been lard. So for those reasons, those are the reasons the Torah brought as well. But like I said, most commentaries go with the reason presented by Shmuel, that being that the coagulant would be non-kosher calf rennet. Let's go to the second page, to page 2. So, the Rishonim, the early commentaries, question whether the 7 opinions that we brought in the Gemara are in dispute, or they're each citing a different reason for the prohibition, and that the cheese was prohibited because of any of these reasons. And the Rishonim, a lot of them come out that if you have any of those reasons still true, if any of them still hold water, then non-Jewish produced cheese would still be forbidden. And in fact, most Rishonim say the prohibition against Gentile cheese exists even when none of those reasons apply because of the nature of the decree. The decree was something called a davar shebaminyan. A davar shebaminyan is a rabbinic injunction created by a large authoritative accepted beis din, which it was at that time. And it remains binding even when the reasons no longer apply until and unless a larger and more authoritative body declares the original injunction is invalid, which never happened. No one ever. And there are still places in the world that certainly use some of the reasons that it was forbidden. As I said, in Europe it's very prevalent to use calf-based rennet, and even in places in the United States of America, for example, Tillamook has one calf-based rennet cheese, so it's possible that it could be used. It's possible that a factory would be using it. So since that's around, it would be still forbidden.
Is that cheese the white cheddar?
Yes, the vintage white cheddar.
Very good. Yes, it is the vintage white cheddar. Yeah. Others even contend that Rabbeinu Tam, who was the main opinion that was lenient, never actually permitted Gvinas Akum, and he was only really placing out a theory. So based on that and the fact that there are Rishonim that say that if any of the reasons apply, it would still be forbidden, and even Rishonim that say if none of the reasons apply, it would still be forbidden because it was never rescinded by a greater beis din. So the prohibition of Gvinas Akum is alive and well and still functional. So 2 very important notes that I want to make before we get on to a few halachic principles are that, and these are the 2 biggest myths about kosher cheese in the entire world, so I'd like to dispel them right now. Send them packing. It's important to note the prohibition, I'm reading this verbatim because it's underlined and important. It's important to note that the prohibition against Gvinas Akum was listed in the Talmud as its own independent prohibition. According to most opinions, it has nothing to do with the laws that govern milk with Chol of Yisrael, right? Or versus Chol of Stam. Chol of Stam being unsupervised milk from a kosher animal, Chol of Yisrael being milk under Jewish supervision. Those are laws that are independent Gvinas akum is its own halacha. It's its own gezerah, its own decree from Chazal. And the laws of Chalav Yisrael are their own halacha. And so those who consume Chalav Stam, myself included, are fully bound to adhere to the prohibition against eating Gvinas akum. Right? We still can't eat Gvinas akum. It's deemed non-kosher under all conditions. It renders the utensils used to cook it non-kosher. And rendering the utensils and cookware used in making it and serving it not kosher as well, just like any other non-kosher ingredient that you use in your kosher pots. And myth number 2. Yeah, 2 fingers. Myth number 2. It's also important to note that this prohibition would apply to all. A, that it's dependent on the laws of Chalav Yisrael. It's not. It's its own independent halacha. And B, that as long as there are kosher ingredients, it's fine. That is not true either, because of the fact that there is this gezerah, this additional decree. So even if you would buy cheese that had completely, but it was not supervised in production by a mashgiach, and we're going to talk about what that means, supervision from a mashgiach, when it comes to cheese production. So if you would have cheese with completely kosher ingredients that came from a non-Jewish company without supervision, that cheese would not be kosher because of this decree of Chazal. So we're going to move on to a couple halachic principles. So I'm at the bottom of page 2 here. A few halachic principles. So we're going to talk about the... All right then.
We're liking it so far.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the Davar Maimed principle. And the question that's involved is, can the minuscule amounts of rennet used in hard cheese render the product non-kosher? So as we're going to see when Tuvia starts talking, that the amount of rennet that's actually used in cheese production is very minuscule. And we have a general halacha when it comes to kashrus that if you have a very minuscule amount of a non-kosher ingredient that gets mixed in with other kosher ingredients, that ingredient would be batal, it would be nullified. In this case, you would need a ratio of 60 to 1 kosher parts to non-kosher parts to be able to nullify it. But seemingly, you would think you could nullify it, just like you can everywhere else in kosher law. However, unfortunately, rennet cannot become batal because of another specific halacha called the davar maimed. That is, that a non-kosher ingredient that gives a product its form, like the coagulant does, it causes it to form into curds, which is called the davar maimed, something that gives it its form, is never nullified because of its significance. There are certain items in halacha that never become batal. Example, chametz on Pesach, or any other thing that's going to become permitted if you just let time pass. There's a few other examples as well. If you have an entire animal fall into a mixture, like the cat that one time fell into the cholent and mir. Ooh, that was bad. Yeah.
What's the normal nullification ratio for ingredients?
In this case, since we'd be talking about liquid, we'd be talking about batal v'shishin, we'd be talking about a ratio of 1 to 60. As long as you had 60 times kosher to the 1 non-kosher. But since it's a davar maimed, it would not become nullified. So even if you'd have trace amounts of non-kosher rennet inside some cheese, that would not become batal, and it would render the entire cheese mixture to be non-kosher. So it wouldn't become batal. So the fear that cheese may contain non-kosher rennet, which now we see can't become batal, so it's a very sensitive ingredient, was that fear that was the motivation for Chazal to prohibit non-Jewish cheese. It's also very important to note, and we're going to see why in a second, that the davar maimed principle is only applied to a non-kosher ingredient that's giving a form to its food. However, if you had a kosher ingredient being used to give form to food, then that could become nullified. So you'll ask, if it's a kosher ingredient, why would you need to nullify it? So now comes the Basar B'Chalav question. Can I have somebody read the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh Deah? That first thing in section B here. Go ahead.
Coagulated milk with the skin of a kosher pot, abasam. If the resultant mixture has a taste of meat, it is forbidden. If it does not, it is permitted.
Right, so we have to figure out why that is, that I could use a piece of calf and put it inside milk, and the resultant mixture would be kosher. And can I have Hadassah read the shach?
If it has a taste of meat, meaning if the milk does not contain enough liquid to nullify the piece of abomasum by a ratio of 1 to 60.
Right, so we said if it has a taste of meat, that it would be forbidden. Nowadays, we don't go by the tasting it. We go by the ratio of 1/60th. That's another halachic principle. That used to be that they would have a non-Jewish chef taste things for them to know if it had the taste of a non-kosher item. Nowadays, we don't do that. We use the Shishim principle to nullify non-kosher ingredients. So, animal rennet or lipase can be kosher, like we said, as long as it's processed in a kosher way. If it's shechted correctly, if it's deveined, if it's salted, it can be kosher. And the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara tell us that if you would use said rennet to make cheese, that cheese could be kosher. So that's good. Red alert, fine. Basar b'cholav, right? You're taking meat, you're putting it into milk. Problem! That should make any kosher-sensitive person jump through the roof. How could you do that? Fine. So that's a big question that came up, and I had a lot of fun researching that one. So, there's actually no halachic problem here, which is amazing. It's fun. Since the amounts, so let's go through all the things. A, the amounts are minuscule. But we said if it's a davar amayim used to give the food its form, it can't become batel. That's only if the thing used to give the form is non-kosher. Here, the thing that we're using to give the food its form is a kosher piece of calf rennet. Oh. And we're not cooking it. So the rennet would be batel, and as long as you had 60 parts milk to 1 part rennet. And the davar amayim principle is not going to apply because that's only if you have a non-kosher ingredient giving the food its form. However, here it's kosher. And in our case, and it's nullified, you're going to use very little amounts, as Tuvia is going to tell us. The ratio is very minuscule. So both ingredients are essentially kosher. The enzymes are not cooked in the milk. Another big principle about basar b'cholav is it's only basar b'cholav on a Torah level if it's cooked together, and that's what's going to make the taste transference. But it's never brought up to a hot enough temperature. For example, the cheddar in Tillamook is cooked at 90-something. Yeah, it's not very hot at all. And they're flavorless. That's another thing. When you have something that doesn't give off any flavor as well, and it's going to be, it comes up when, for example, with medicines. So then it's also not really treated as food at all. Yes?
What temperature would be considered cooking?
It's called yad soledispo. It's the temperature at which a hand would retract from it. In most industrial settings and the industrial kashrus agencies,